Hi, this is Terry, and this is It's About Writing again. Today we have Allison Wells, and she's going to share with us her books. She has 3 published books, and just what kind of writing she does. Hi, Allison.
Hey, nice to see you.
Good to see you too. How are you at this almost Christmas?
I am good. I've run out of places to hide presents is how I'm doing now.
Well,
With
you said
4
you have
kids.
4 children, and they're at the
Yeah,
ages where they can snoop, right?
yes, yeah, my 5-year-old asks me all the time, Mom, where have you hidden my presents? I cannot find them.
Ah,
Okay, good.
yeah, that was the plan.
Yeah, mission accomplished. So,
Yeah. So do you get to write during December at all?
um, I try constantly, it's
Yeah.
always an attempt at writing, but it definitely gets harder depending on the time of year. Christmases can get rough, especially this year with they're switching back and forth between face-to-face school and virtual school.
Yeah.
That's definitely thrown a wrench in the plans a few times, but
Yeah.
you make do with what you get. So
It's been a crazy year, that's for sure.
mhm.
Well, tell us about you and your writing.
Well, personally, I am a wife. I have 4 children. We live in South Carolina, which is my happy place.
Yeah.
I love it here. I have 3 books published, one that's coming out in the spring, and 3 of the 4 are set in South Carolina. So
Oh,
it's just
fun.
a place that's near and dear to me. And um, about my writing, I write Christian historical fiction.
Oh,
Actually, my one coming out in the spring is contemporary, which is a little scary for me. But
oh,
mostly historical. Um, Christian, but I call it gritty Christian because I try to write things that are truthful. Because when you live the life of a Christian, life is not a Hallmark movie. You don't always have happy rainbows and sunshine everywhere.
yeah.
Things still happen. So I try to reflect that in my writing.
I appreciate that when authors do that. Yeah. So show us your books. Do you have them with you?
I do, of course. My first novel that came out is called War Torn Heart, and I try not to get glare on that.
Yep.
War Torn Heart. Do you want to hear about them too?
Yeah, just give us a quick summary there or the back
Okay.
blurb.
Yeah. Well, War Torn Heart is a story set in South Carolina. It takes place during World War II, and it is about a young lady who falls in love with a cadet at Clemson College, which I live in Clemson. I don't know if you've heard of Clemson University.
Okay.
Um, National champions several times recently. Uh,
Yeah.
but so he's a Clemson cadet. He goes off to the war, and there's a lot of heartache that happens during the course of the book. But of course, we all want love to triumph and overcome. So
Mhm.
that's the first one that came out early 2019. And then this is When Waves Break. This is the follow-up book. Again, trying not to get glare on there.
Mhm.
This is the follow-up. This follows the main characters from the first book. This follows their children. So spoiler alert, there was a happy ending.
Okay.
But this is about their twin daughters, Eve and Juliet, who are growing up in Myrtle Beach in the 1960s, late 1960s. And there's a lot of civil rights issues going on, as well as the
Mhm.
twins as young adults learning that free love movement isn't exactly all that they think it's cracked up to be.
Oh,
So,
wow.
and
That's a really good
learning
issue.
to lean on God for all that they're doing as opposed to trying to figure it out themselves.
Mm.
And then the third one that came out this past summer is Belle of the Night. And this one is my not South Carolina book. This one takes place in New Orleans. And it is actually, believe it or not, about um, if you know New Orleans history at all, they used to have a red light district, a legal red light district called
Mhm.
Storyville. And it's about a prostitute who falls in love with a preacher.
Wow.
Um, and it is clean. It is Christian, so no bad words, no gratuitous
Mhm.
scenes of any kind. But this was my personal favorite. It was a bit of a labor of love. So setting this one out was
Wow.
was probably the hardest one, but
That
also the
sounds
most
really good.
gratifying.
I like that title too for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's my favorite title too.
Yeah, that's a good one. And you have one coming out in the spring.
I do. In May of this coming year, a book called Living Water will be coming out, and that is actually a contemporary novel based off of the woman at the well from John 4 in the Bible, who's the woman who, the Samaritan woman that Jesus asked for a drink of water, and she, is like, why do you want a drink of water from me? And he tells her about living water, and that's the name of the book. And it's the story of the woman who, if you recall in the Bible, Jesus says, oh, you've been married 5 times. And she says, how did you know this about me? And so this is the story of Roxy, who gets married 5 times. And we kind of go through all of her marriages, her 5 marriages, and the transformation that happens throughout her life.
Wow, that just sounds so good.
So thank you.
Well,
I hope so.
so, well, I'm just wondering where you get your inspiration for, or how you get inspired for specific stories.
Well, like the one coming out in the spring, that the inspiration was John chapter 4, where Jesus encounters the woman at the well. And she's never even named in the Bible. So I think that a lot of that for me was like, well, who is she? What was her name? What was her story? Why was she married 5 times? What happened? Where did that come from? And what happened in her circumstances? For
Yeah.
Belle of the Night, I had been, actually my best friend had moved at that point in time to Texas, and we figured out that New Orleans was a good halfway point for us. So I was looking up stuff about New Orleans and came across the photos of a photographer from the early 1900s named E.J. Bullock. And Bullock, if you research this, be prepared. There's several nude photos, but I came across these photos, and this one particular photo struck me so much. Just this beautiful girl with long black hair, and she's sitting, she's not even looking at the camera, and I'm like, is she ashamed? What's her story? So I was immediately drawn into that one particular photo, of this, pretty girl with long hair and the beautiful, probably her fanciest dress.
Wow.
And was just totally drawn in, and I thought, I've got to tell her story. So
That's great. So do you have any other advice for us on inspiration? Like how do you get inspired for certain stories?
I think inspiration can come from anywhere. I have a book that's about halfway written, that it's from a song that I heard, and it's an older song from the early 90s, I think. And every time I heard it, I thought, where did this come from? Where did this story come from? Why? Like, what was, I don't know what their inspiration was for writing it, but like, it's about it's from the perspective of a guy who's saying, you have a choice between him or me. And he's trying to convince this girl to pick him. And so that kind of, for me, was like, well, who doesn't love a love triangle when they're reading a romance?
Yeah.
So that just kind of got me, where in the song he's saying, this guy here, he's rich, he's got everything, but I have none of that, but pick me anyway. So I don't know, I just was really drawn in by that. Just current events going on in the news with, sorry, we're having a disturbance. Current events happening in the news, with like the second wave of civil rights movement. That's definitely been an inspiration for me in terms of trying to write something that projects a positive voice, but also a realistic voice.
Yeah. That's great. So so historical seems easy for me, like to get inspiration, because you have stories already, or you have things
Right.
already in place. And sometimes contemporary, I feel like I could go like any direction. So
I would agree. Contemporary really gets me, because if I read a book that's a contemporary book, but it came out, say, 5-10 years ago, then I'm reading it and it's talking about, MySpace, or the beginnings of Facebook, things like that, where I'm reading it and I'm going, that's not how it works anymore, or a flip phone. And I'm like, but that's not how it works. So I find I have a hard time with that. So writing this one was tough for me, because I was trying to write, she create a Facebook or whatever. And I was like, this is going to be outdated in a couple of years. So I tend to like the historical stuff because it's already
Yeah.
outdated and I already know what happens.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah,
I
I
find
think it is harder to, because and it's even thinking back, because I was already an adult having kids when all this technology came out. So like it's hard for me to remember, and I could look it up, but which year was what thing, or
right.
what was going on at that period of time when it's just changed so fast.
Right. And I toyed with the first two books because one is a sequel of sorts. I mean, it's a standalone book, but it does follow a family line. And I thought about writing a third one, but that would have made that set of people adults like 10, 15 years before I hit adulthood. And so I was really struggling with that, how things work. Because in the year 2000, I turned 20. So
Wow.
having someone who was already 30 or 40 was kind of like, I didn't quite know how to handle that, how to handle the beginnings of the internet. Because for me, I kind of grew up in that stage,
Mhm.
in that era, whereas they would have already been established and been parents. And so I really struggled with trying to figure that out. And I was like, no, I can't do it. It was just too
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, it makes it more difficult, that's for sure.
Yeah, I definitely prefer historical. I really enjoy doing the research for it, trying to figure out in When Waves Break, set in like 1968, one of the characters gets pregnant. And so I'm trying to figure out, how did they figure that out? They didn't have a home pregnancy test at that time. So what did they do? And trying to figure out how that worked. Or for the book set in New Orleans, it's 1915. What were refrigerators like? How did that work? What did they use for refrigeration? Did they use an ice box? Did they have a refrigerator? So I
Yeah.
really love researching all this, and of course the fashions of the time. I really, really like to do. I've been writing a book recently that's set in the antebellum period, and of course trying to research the dresses and the appropriate attire is
Yeah.
that's a rabbit hole all on its own. So
Right, right. Well, what do you do when you have writer's block? When either you can't come up with an idea or you've started in and you're just stuck.
stuff. Well, I usually find it I do best when I take a step back for a little bit, even a couple of weeks, and read other books. Reading generally helps me to get through writer's block, or I need to change the scenery. I work at home and I have 4 kids, and I sit facing out where I can see the pile of dishes and the laundry. And so if
Oh,
I can change the scenery, that often does a lot for me. I joke with my family that going to Walmart is quiet time for me because it's quieter than my house.
wow.
So I do enjoy just trying to get a change of scenery, or reading a book that's set in the time period that I'm writing about,
Mm,
or that has a similar feel to what I'm going for. Or I'll totally change it up and read something totally different. If I'm writing historical, I'll read a contemporary,
mhm.
just to kind of get my mind to change gears a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's usually the best. Or again, comes same place with inspiration when you have writer's block, is doing something that can bring that, like listening to the song, the one I've been writing. I started that several years ago and haven't worked on it in a good while because I'd had other things come up. But just re-listening to that song that inspired me in the first place can really kind
Mhm.
of help. Reading through lyrics, or again, yeah, changing scenery. If I can go somewhere and try to write that's away from all of the chaos in my house, that's always a good help for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's all great advice. Some of those things have helped me too. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
So,
sometimes you just have to try different things. If something doesn't work, move
yeah,
on, try something else.
sometimes just going away for a walk is helpful to me too, just outside in
Absolutely.
nature.
Yeah, absolutely. It just um looking at it from a different perspective helps as well. Or I will jump. Like if I'm stuck, I don't know what happens here, but I know what happens way down, chapters later. I will skip and come back to it.
Oh,
And that usually, and then I'll fill it back in. And that helps me a lot because I tell my husband all the time, I don't know what happens next. I know what happens a year later, but I don't know what happens now. And he's like, well, write what
Yeah.
happens in a year. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So fun. Well, what was your publishing journey like?
a lot of rejections, a lot of rejections. I started off, um, my books were actually published in the order in which I wrote them, which is strange. I don't know if that happens a lot or not, but I wrote Belle of the Night. I wrote Belle of the Night in 2011, and I felt like it was my strongest work, and it was the one I really just felt the most developed. So I pushed it a lot. I shopped it out to agents and publishers for
Mm.
several years. And because it's such a tough topic of a prostitute falling in love with a pastor, it was Christian, but it was not pretty Christian. So I had
Mhm.
Christian markets telling me it was too secular. I had secular markets telling me it was too Christian.
Mhm.
And I got tons of rejections. And in this day and age, when you just email out a query to agents or publishers, if they don't want it, they don't tell you anything. You get no
Right.
response. Every now and again, you'd get someone who would say, oh, your writing is great, but we just don't think this fits. And I got a lot of those. But a lot of the time, you just got nothing in reply. So you had no idea. Um, the first book I wrote back in 2005. And that was War Torn Heart. And I had heard about a publisher that was in my area here in South Carolina. And I had actually interviewed an author of theirs for an article that I wrote for the local magazine. And so I thought, well, they're really, really conservative, and I knew they wouldn't go for a prostitute falling in love with a pastor. So I said, let me send them this first one. It's the most hallmarkish of my books. It just kind of has that, everything's kind of tied up neat and pretty with a bow at the end, and it's a sweet story. So I sent them that, and they took it, which was really, really shocking. But it took a lot of rejections before that to get started.
Yeah. So faithfulness to send out a lot of queries.
Always,
Yeah.
always, all the time. And it go in waves. Especially, I don't know how typical my story is with 4 kids and how I would do it, but I'd send out queries to 10, 20, 30 agents or publishers, and wait and wait and wait. And so then I'd wait maybe 6 months, and when I figured by then none of them wanted it or I'd actually gotten a reply, I would send out another wave. I'd again research on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, um, who was accepting, who, even if they weren't accepting,
Hmm.
flush piles can get published every now and again. So I would just do research on who were new agents in the field that I was looking at, who were new agents in my genre. Even if they weren't new, just who might sound like they had an interest in this.
Yeah.
And just keep going. So every couple of months, I'd just send out a whole new set of queries and say, hey, give me a chance. I maybe kind of know what I'm doing. So
Yeah.
and you're really just not getting discouraged. That's the big thing. It's just to not be discouraged by rejections, because I'm pretty sure everyone gets them.
Hmm.
There's the whole thing I see floating around that J.K. Rowling got rejected thousands of times
Right.
before someone finally picked up Harry Potter. So, just keep going, and don't let 100 rejections, to get you down and make you give up, because it can happen. And especially in today's day and age where you can do, direct to Kindle publishing or
Hmm.
any kind of self-publishing. I have a good friend who's an author who did self-publish her first book, and she actually had an early YouTube channel years ago. And she was an avid writer and reader, and she wrote fantasy, and
Wow.
she self-published her first book. And because she had such a good YouTube following, her book went wild. She got signed to HarperCollins, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say, am I allowed to say names of publishers? So,
Sure.
okay. She got signed to HarperCollins and wrote a whole series that's been New York Times #1 bestseller for
Wow.
every book in the series. So
That's a good story.
yeah, yeah. So, it's just sometimes it's luck of the draw, and sometimes it just takes that time, that effort, that grit to push
Yeah.
forward and not give up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been so nice to talk to you today and helpful as a writer to hear your story. So thank you. I'll be sharing Allison's links along with this YouTube video. Go and check out all her books and her website and everything. And thanks everybody for watching It's About Writing.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks.
Thanks.